Death is actually, it's a human event, not a clinical one. It is a human experience that we will all go through. So if they've got some level of information from you, some understanding of your thoughts and feelings about what you want from death and your funeral, you are supporting their grief. It's a gift. You are gifting somebody the knowledge and the power and the control, the calmness and the confidence to go, it's okay, I know what they wanted. I'll never forget, I looked after one, he was 99, he was Mandarin. All he did in the last few days of his life was call for his mum. It was heartbreaking, but equally comforting to know that actually, yes, this was happening now. Something happens around death. There is something else. Biggest mistake is not preparing. I see firsthand the impact of not talking.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Life in Deep. My name's James and today I'm being joined by Katie Costello. Now Katie, I've got your ChatGPT synopsis here so you can...
God.
Yeah,
Go on.
I know, you can try and correct it. Katie Costello is a death doula or soul midwife, providing emotional and spiritual support to individuals nearing the end of their lives, particularly with her Dying for a Cuppa masterclass, which we'll be talking about later on. In her role, she helps patients and families navigate death-related challenges, from coping with existential fears to addressing practical concerns about end-of-life logistics. Is that good so far?
Scarily good.
It is, isn't it?
But AI scares me. But anyway, carry on.
It's terrifying, isn't it?
It really is.
Katie's insights often reveal common regrets, primarily about missed opportunities for meaningful experiences and connections rather than material accomplishments. Her work emphasises the value of making memories and prioritising relationships over possessions, offering unique comfort during life's final stages.
Wow.
Kind of annoyed that I let you know that ChatGPT had done that. I should have said
I would have
did
been
it.
very impressed.
Well, my research team, while I was holding an 8-month baby screaming his head off, was like, oh, there we go.
Yeah.
I think we should just get straight into it.
Sure.
What were you doing before you became a death doula?
It feels like another life. I've always been a people person. I used to work in retail. So I was working in shops and retail from like your first Saturday job. I was working at the local golf club. Then I was working in shoes. Then I was an estate agent for my sins for a little while. And then I was in retail, working for women's clothing. The thing I loved about all of that was the people. And weirdly, I always felt like I was meant to do something more. I was always a bit like the weird kid or the kid that was into star signs. And personally, I have a deep spiritual faith, but my work has nothing to do with that. But personally, I think that was all part of my journey, if you like. Someone said to me, have you thought about working in care? And as soon as I did, it was like duck to water. I was like, I'm home. And what weirdly then happened is I was working in domiciliary care. So that is very much a kind of just person to person, looking after them to be able to live at home. They may not be dying, but they may be poorly, they may be elderly, they may be frail. They need a bit of help around the house. They need a bit of help to get washed and dressed and ready for the day. And I loved it because, again, it was still people. And I could talk for England, as you will very well hear. It was perfect for me. I'm a warm person. To be with people has always been something that I kind of, situation I thrive in. But what I noticed, and what everybody around me noticed, and my team as well, is that everywhere I went then, people would start to die. So, of course, there was a nickname of the Angel of Death. Yeah, I know it sounds weird. But I say that in the sense of it was always me that was there. I seem to have this inner wisdom, or as I see it, that I knew what to do, what to say, how to be with them, how to support the family. And very quickly, even more so, started to realise that this is where I was meant to be. So spiritually, the way I see it, the stars aligned, everything opened up. I started to look into how I could work more closely with people at the end of their lives without going into nursing or becoming a doctor or anything. And that's when I found soul midwifery, which is, I'm a soul midwife, which is like a death doula. So it's like an end-of-life companion, essentially. And we can then work with people in any way they need, from diagnosis to death and beyond, in the way that they need. It could be supporting their religious or spiritual faith, but it could be going to appointments. So when I read about soul midwifery and realised what it entailed, again, it was like, oh my God, this is me. This is actually what was meant to be doing. So then I went to go and work at my local hospice to get a bit more experience, practical experience working with the dying, and then did my soul midwife training. And then kind of my new life ensued after that, really.
So you say you're spiritual, but that doesn't inform your work. I mean, doesn't it a bit?
It does. I think the key thing for people to know is that it informs my work in the way that I work, how I support myself, but it's not up to me to impart my faith or beliefs on anybody else. So I can support a Jewish person, a Scientologist, an atheist, and somebody that's agnostic. I can support a devout Christian, a Catholic. It's irrelevant to me what their faith is. I can support their faith, if any at all. My spiritual faith helps me deal with my work then when I go home. I do believe that death is like a transition rather than an ending, for example. And that's very much the kind of ethos of soul midwifery, is that we see death as a sacred rite of passage. We see death as not an ending. We see death as something to be honoured and respected and nurtured. And we see it as not necessarily a scary or horrible thing. We see it from that spiritual soul perspective. And same, like death doulas will do their training in a very similar way, but without necessarily that spiritual viewpoint. So that's really the only difference in what you call yourself or the training you've done. But the soul midwifery training, that's what really resonated with me and my own faith about life. So I also am an angelic Reiki practitioner. I have an affinity to crystals. I do a lot of what I lovingly refer to as the woo-woo stuff.
Right.
Some people say that in a derogatory way, but I don't mind that term. But equally, they wouldn't necessarily tell somebody to get rid of their rosary beads. That's deemed, that would be respected. Whereas if somebody else is holding crystals, somebody else might go, oh, actually, that's a load of nonsense. What's that about? It's all faith. It's all a faith in something. It's all a connection to something. So all of that means something to me helps me, like I said, when I go home at the end of the day, but it's not up to me to tell somebody else what their viewpoint of death is or how they should see it. I can't make anybody feel anything other than what they're feeling. My role as a soul midwife is to sit and hold space with them, to be with them, to just be one human being to another, letting them know they're safe, they're loved, and they're as okay as they possibly can be. Now, if that does involve prayer or scripture or having, the rabbi come in, then great, I can do that with them. But actually, fundamentally, it's just one human being with another in a really horrible, difficult situation.
So as usual, all my questions have gone out the window straight away.
Carry on. This often happens.
I've got about 20 more that I want to ask you now. One thing you did say is that you went to the local hospice to train with people who were dying, effectively.
Yes.
How do you do that? Do you just turn up and say, "Oh, I want to"? Can you let me in? I want to work with dying people.
What's really interesting, that's what some people think. Now, just going back to what you mentioned about my life before, my parents, I'm very blessed to still have both my parents. I had an incredible family life. And my parents have always been very open with me about death, about sex, about drugs, all of it. If I had a question, they told me. So when grandparents died, pets died, family friends died, it was discussed. I was allowed to go to the funeral if I wanted to. My dad's side of the family is Irish. So it was open casket. It was all kids running around, playing around the coffin in Ireland. So I was always open to it and nothing was ever shielded. And I had the natural experiences. Like I said, losing pets and grandparents is normally where little people, their first experience of grief comes from. Then obviously as life goes on, I've had my own experiences and as an adult of losing people. So I just always felt like there was something more to life anyway. So when all this kind of stuff transpired and my life opened up in this way, it was already there. All my experiences and everything I felt, and that awareness of grief, the awareness of death being part of life, the awareness of it, the naturalness and normalness of death and dying was already within me, thanks to my parents and my experiences anyway. So that kind of hugely then helped when I went into this role of having my own experiences of grief myself and everything I'd gone through to then go, okay, well, actually, I could use that. And I've actually processed that and had an awareness of that anyway that's allowed me to have some level of healing and acceptance, which is also another thing I help people with. And
you're lucky as well because you're obviously a very good communicator. And thinking about what you said with having pets die, that I always found growing up that's a really important part of learning about death. And people who don't have pets are often much more shielded from the implications of death and what it means. Do you think people are shielded from death now? Do you think it used to be something that everyone saw regularly. Lots of people died during the Black Death, things like that. Horrible things used to happen in the past. We now live longer. Death seems to be a lot more clinical, medicalised maybe. What do you think?
I totally agree. And this is one of the things that I say to people a lot is that death is it's a human event, not a clinical one. It is a human experience that we will all go through. Not every death needs medical intervention even. Not everybody needs medication. Not everybody has oncology and chemo. And like we're so divorced and detached from death now that we don't really understand what it is to die because we're so focused on, because we live longer, we have more treatment, we have incredible medicine and research and science and doctors. And, we have this amazing NHS. We've got so much now in life to support us when we're poorly. But what we kind of have done with all of that incredible treatment is forget that actually at some point it's not going to work. We're not meant to live forever, but we do live longer. We do have more complex illnesses or more complex disabilities that we have to live with for longer. We are able to cure certain cancers and illnesses that we weren't 20, 50, 100 years ago. So of course our lives are totally different. And we've gone so far with that we've gone too far the other way to then forget that actually, like I said, we're all going to die anyway, no matter what treatment, no matter what illness. Our bodies are only designed to go on for so long.
And people rarely die at home now as well.
Actually,
tell me, what are the statistics, or have you got them to hand?
80% of people want to die at home, and they reckon only 50% of the time that happens. I do think it's going back, and we are changing for the better. So you mentioned about obviously the Black Death and how things were. Our society's perceptions of death have kind of gone full circle, and we are coming back. Changes are happening, I think, for the better, where it was accepted that if somebody was dying, even if a child was dying, it was at home. The parents were there. The grandparents came in. The greengrocer dropped off the vegetables. Kids were playing around. Somebody might be playing music or reading prayer. It was a community event. And as the saying goes, it takes a village. That's how death was. That's how death is in many other cultures and many other religions and countries. It's very much accepted and honoured and witnessed. And there is ritual, religious or not. There are practices. There's a belief about the family, what you get from the living being with the dying. There's so many other ways to think about it in other countries and cultures that we have forgotten. But I do think we are coming back round to this idea of how we can die well. Knowing we have an option to die at home, living wakes, living funerals, things that are in the news. Social media, I think, is a blessing and a curse, but we have some incredibly brave people that have shared their journey on social media with various illnesses and cancers who have then done their death and their funeral in their way, publicly, for the greater good. And I think that is serving us well going forward. So I hope we are coming back to this idea of accepting death as more of a normal and, part of life, and actually normalising everything that goes with it.
What is a living wake and a living funeral?
It is where basically you have your funeral before you've died. So you have a celebration of your life.
Sounds nuts.
With you there. Again, why? Okay, question
I bet
for you
it's
though.
Brilliant. I bet it's amazing.
It is incredible. Why is it nuts? Why do you think it's nuts?
Do you know of people who've done that when they're completely fine?
Yes.
They haven't got an illness. They're not terminally ill. They're just fine. And I'm going to have a life funeral. I'll just say a word. It sounds kind of narcissistic, slightly, which is a very trendy word these days.
It is a bit of a trendy word. We are, again, going back to British culture, we're not very good at patting ourselves on the back.
No.
We're not very good at accepting a compliment.
Anyone does well, it's like, oh.
But equally, when somebody goes, oh my God, look what I did, I smashed that, we're like, all right, think a lot of yourself. It's awful that we don't allow anybody. Yeah, when all they're doing is celebrating themselves. And I was talking about Jess with this cancer support group I was in. And they were saying about, but when do you plan it? And actually, is it right that I'm there? Do I want to hear it? But actually, I kind of do want to hear how much my family love me, because everybody likes to hear that they're loved. Everybody likes to hear that they're cherished. Everyone likes to hear that people are proud of them. Everyone likes to hear that they've made a difference in somebody's life. And what I was trying to say to this group of people was, you saying about somebody doing it while they're well. The reality is, I said, you lot might outlive me. I could go and get knocked down by a bus tomorrow. And this is the other thing. We assume that we have all this time. We assume that maybe we have to wait till we get a diagnosis, or that we're in a cancer support group, or that you're being told by somebody like me to go, you need to plan your death. We need to think about your advanced care planning. You need to think about your funeral because you're dying. We wait for somebody to give us that permission or tell us that's what we need to do. But there's nothing stopping us doing it sooner. So I'm a big advocate for talking about death sooner rather than later. Talking about your options, maybe not even getting your affairs in order as such, but at least having conversations with the people around you that are going to be left behind, who are ultimately going to be the ones that are going to be making those decisions for you. So if they've got some level of information from you, some understanding of your thoughts and feelings about what you want from death and your funeral, you are supporting their grief. It's a gift. You are gifting somebody the knowledge and the power and the control and the calmness and the confidence to go, it's okay, I know what they wanted. When they're already amidst grief and that heavy, icky, just such a challenging time, they haven't got the added, what the heck do I do?
I kind of want to know, what does a week of being a death doula look like, or a day in the life? I mean, you said to us earlier on, before we started the interview, that you're travelling all the way, like all over the southern England.
Yeah. What's really interesting is people often call me, but they don't know why they're calling me. They just are in a situation that they feel what do I do? They may have heard about soul midwives or death doulas. They may have researched themselves. They may be open. They may have heard it from a random podcast, which is half the reason I do what I do, to not just from my own perspective, but to put it out there so people know that there are people like me. Not they don't all talk as much as me, but there are people out there, so they know they've got other support and other resources. I've got 4 areas of my work. So I'm a soul midwife. I'm a funeral celebrant. So that's the one that hosts and officiates the funeral. I'm also a death educator with my own death education program. And I also offer professional services like consultancy, workshop, events for all sorts of businesses and organisations. So my weeks vary literally day to day, hour to hour. With the soul midwifery, someone will call me. They won't know what they want. We often meet if they're local, or it might be on Zoom or a phone call, to unpick the situation and actually figure out, is it me they need? Do they just need to talk? Equally, sometimes people might call me to go, I want a soul midwife. I want to plan my death. And they know very much what they want to do. So in which case it's like, okay, great. And then you can make a plan. I can't always plan the soul midwifery because I don't know what it's going to entail. So for example, at the moment, I have 2 people that I'm working with quite closely, one of which is very close to the end of their life. The other one probably is in the last year of their life. So with one of them, I'm working more on kind of just companionship and talking and just supporting them through their natural changes that they're going through. The other one, I'm focusing very much more on death planning, funeral planning, supporting the family, helping them and their family understand the changes that they will go through as their body deteriorates even further, talking about fears, but also collecting memories to leave behind for the family. We're just sort of working very intensely. I won't ever really work with more than 2 people at a time like that because it's a lot, emotionally on me. And I need to make sure that I have the emotional and mental capacity to show up and to hold space for them. My weeks vary and my days vary depending on what people need. So a lot of the time I might be signposting, maybe to other soul midwives or to death doulas or to other organisations. And then obviously amidst that, I might be meeting a family to plan a funeral. I might then be hosting a funeral. But when it comes to funerals, I'm not that celebrant that will bosh out 12 services a week with a template script. That's not how I work. I believe every funeral should be written from scratch. It should be a unique, bespoke service for every single person because we are so unique. Our stories will be totally different. You couldn't have a script for each of us at our funeral. It wouldn't be right. You probably couldn't say anything the same. Our lives are so different. So I only do maybe 2 or 3 funerals a week. But even, and that varies. And when I meet with a family, I'm there with them for a couple of hours to hear all about the person, to really figure out, again, their choices, what they want, the feel for the service, to just go through everything and make sure it is as personal and heartfelt and right for them as they need. And then obviously with the death education, people can sign up to my education course online on my website and enroll, individually and do their own training. Equally, I go around to businesses, care homes, care agencies, which I'm doing a lot more work with now, where I'm going out and hosting training days. Because the death education, I'm trying to do more face-to-face because you can't train death via e-learning. It just doesn't seem right. I'm trying to tell people this is a human experience and yet that you can't just go through a tick list online. So the death education, I may have a day or 2 where I'm training, in a care home or with a couple of one-to-one people. So an organisation could maybe have end-of-life champions. And then that works alongside the professional services where I'm kind of doing now more consultancy work where I might be working. I've recently worked with a finance company and an HR company to help support them as management, but their staff with their well-being, with their understanding of grief and bereavement, they may have specific people in their organisation that have an illness themselves that are still trying to work but are going through chemo and they're trying to find better ways of supporting them. So all of my 11 years now, nearly 12 years I've got in end of life, I've kind of created this crazy career, which I love, and I'm able to support people in different ways. So I've had to really learn to just go with the flow on a daily basis, if I'm honest, and I just go where I'm needed, hence all the travel as well.
So what does job satisfaction look like? Like when are you like, job well done, like a mechanic can fix a car, we can record a great podcast. What's job satisfaction for a
really
death
good question.
doula?
I can't say I get job satisfaction when all of my work feeds my soul. All of it, every day. If I have a CEO of some HR company say to me, I never thought about that. Do you know what? Now I can talk to Mrs. Smith about her situation and I feel better for that. Gosh, I walk away going, someone's thought about something different. Mrs. Smith now is going to get a bit more compassion. like, this is what I'm here for. It sounds really cheesy, but everything I do is for the greater good. Yes, I'm running a business. I have to feed my son. Annoyingly, they want feeding every day. I know yours is only young, but it gets worse.
Yeah.
So, I have to feed my son. I have to pay my mortgage. I have to put petrol in my car. Like, I'm running a business. But I have all of this skill, all of this knowing, all of this inner wisdom. I very much feel this is my soul's calling in this life. So the fact that I can do it every day and I can make a difference in some way is all the satisfaction I need.
Yeah, I mean, without sounding crass, it doesn't sound to me like money would be... It sounds like that's just something that happens because you're doing something you love and really enjoy doing.
Yeah.
So going back, how did you get a job at a hospice?
So I was employed at the hospice. So some people, you can volunteer at hospice in many different roles, but I was employed. So going from my domiciliary care, knowing that I wanted to become a soul midwife, I also knew that I needed more experience with hands-on care with the dying. As much as I had this inner wisdom and this knowing, I knew that I wanted as well and needed to have this more experience. So I looked at my local hospice. They had some healthcare assistant vacancies and I went and got the job because I was already kind of doing it. And thankfully, they saw what I feel, which is this is very much where I'm supposed to be. So I've been there for 8 years, although I have just left due to, and this is a slight tangent, but there's a real hospice crisis with funding. So the funding got pulled, so our whole team at the hospice got removed. And we were the hospice at home team. So we were 12 carers, essentially, that would go out, expert end-of-life specialists, go out and look after people that are dying at home. So also what you were saying earlier about people, do people want to die at home? They do, but they need help to do it. Not always. But most of the time there is some guidance, some support needed to understand, one, what to expect, two, how to manage it as regards equipment and, other agencies and other therapies that can be involved and things that they might need, things that the family need to know. But our whole team was funded externally and that external funding has been pulled.
So those people aren't going to get that help anymore.
No, but that not only does it go into my overall mission, which is about, talking and sharing and making people and helping people understand their choices and their options and helping and facilitating those conversations. I feel even more passionate about that now, particularly as a soul midwife, because this is where we come in. Soul midwives, death doulas, we bridge that gap. So we support that hands-on care. We've got hospices, Mary Curing, Macmillan, so many other organisations which are all overstretched and underpaid. I mean, aren't we all? But the resources just aren't there. Now that they're pulling funding from much needed resources, which is very much an argument going on in Parliament and the government at the moment. There's a huge organisation called Hospice UK. They are very much leading the way in encouraging writing to MPs and changing the way that the funding works. So, we're trying to do everything we can, but these cuts are already being made. The damage is already done.
Do you think maybe some of that comes from the fact that people just think, well, it's for dying people? We're not thinking about the future of someone's life in 10 to 20 years' time. Yeah. Whereas actually what it really does affect is the family around those dying people because they'd never had the proper hospice care that they expected.
I think it is just really indicative of where we're at as a society. I think even the bigwigs that have the money or the government, they're not seeing the value in end-of-life care because they're really not understanding what it looks like and what it means. So I've also shared quite a lot on my social media platforms about that reality. As a soul midwife, death educator, I speak very honestly and openly about death. Some people can't even say the D word. Some people can't say the C word. And I don't mean Christmas, cancer. When somebody... people
I had a different word in my head. We're talking about swearing a minute ago.
I didn't even think about that word.
Well, you said about swearing. That's where it came from. Sorry.
Christmas, cancer, all that one. But people don't want to say it. So when it comes to having conversations with the people that have the money to really understand that people dying at home, the care they need, the education, people are dying in A&E corridors. These people either haven't experienced that or they don't want to talk about it. They won't even address the reality of it. So I feel like I'm a one-woman band at the moment, but I'm trying to get people to listen. Everybody is, to be fair, in this side of life. Everybody that is coming from a hospice or working in end-of-life care that is experiencing the cuts, not only themselves from a job, but obviously experiencing the cuts and knows the difference it's going to make, is trying to, fight for it. Everybody else in the community is going, oh, that's a shame, and carrying on about their day because they don't understand the impact that it will have if they need it and if it's not there.
You'd have thought people... especially after 2020 with COVID, when death was being printed on newspapers and reported on in its hundreds of thousands every day, that it would have brought home the fact that it just feels like people don't think death actually happens. And yet, would you have thought that after COVID, did you ever see, there's a chink of light here that we can maybe bring people around to that and secure funding for the future?
I think it was a blessing and a curse in one way. I think it did make people go, oh, heck, my own mortality, that of my family, my person that is already ill is now vulnerable. Oh, gosh, I must make sure, So it did open our eyes in one way, and I think make us appreciate human connection, because we lost it. Literally, we lost the connection between our friends, our neighbours we couldn't touch. There was all of that got stripped, and we were faced with death. So I think it made us open our eyes. But I think it did it so much that I think then people turned away. I stopped watching the news, and I was working in it. So because it just got too much. And then I think, we were clapping for the NHS. We were doing all these amazing things, shopping for your neighbours. As soon as the world started to open up again and we went back to normal, I feel like we'd taken 2 steps forwards and another step back. But the other thing I think COVID has done, I think it has increased death anxiety in some ways, because it suddenly made it very real and slapped people in the face with it, which I think is a good thing in some ways. But equally, it made people face things in a really scary way. So it wasn't like, okay, let's have a conversation about death. Do you know this is an option? It was suddenly, you're going to die. Everyone you love's going to die. Don't touch anybody. It was done with so much fear for the COVID perspective, which rightly or wrongly, again, that's a whole other debate. Maybe we won't go down that road. But then like I said, it just instilled fear. And I also don't think we've seen the last of the COVID repercussions. I think all of our mental health and emotional well-being was affected in some way. We all suffered and lost something, whether it be just a loved one's birthday or somebody dying. Everybody lost or experienced some level of bereavement. And I think the repercussions, we're going to see that, I think, for still many years to come.
I think I 100% agree in that, especially in young people, children.
Yes. Toddlers, babies.
Not being able to talk properly.
Yep.
Not seeing people's faces.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yes.
I think what would be a nice thing for us to do is to go down the pathway and explore the pathway of the pathway. It's a word that you've probably heard quite a lot actually,
yeah.
Of what happens when someone's dying. Mm-hmm. And from a perspective of what are the questions you're asked the most by the family around that person.
Okay.
So do they suddenly lose weight, or do they get, I know a friend of mine's father passed away just last week, and he was a lovely old boy, but he did get very cranky, and his attitude towards his family changed in the last few days of his life, that they found really, really upsetting.
Yeah, I bet.
But they did kind of go, he's going now, and therefore he might not, that's not him.
Again, this is the end of life, or active dying. Again, I could be here for a lot longer, so I'll try and squeeze a few bits in.
So, however long you've got, really.
Okay. Well, a couple of things to bear in mind with this is the physical body does go through a general trajectory, if you like, of dying. So everybody's death will be different depending on why they're dying, the age that they're dying, dementia, or any kind of mental capacity situations play a big part in somebody's dying journey. Yeah, their environment and their family situation. So there are many things that affects how a person dies and how they feel about dying. But ultimately, the body knows what it's doing. So the body will go through a kind of standard process, I don't know if that's the word, will go through many common things that many people will experience. So in some midwifery terms, we look at death in stages, and we look at it from the perspective of the elements. So we look at it from earth, water, fire and air. So I'll kind of base it roughly on that. But again, not to go too sort of spiritual with it, but keep it very, human, if you like. So the earth phase is as we become more poorly or more frail with whatever illness at whatever age, I call it mojo. We lose our mojo. So we start to get weaker. We get tired. We don't want to go out as much. We may start to lose weight. Our physical smells and touch and sensations of our physical body all start to change. So not only do maybe we smell different, but what we're smelling in others, our senses all start to go a little bit haywire. So that we often see that really obviously in our grandparents.
Yeah.
Or our great-grandparents,
Definitely the smell, the sort of old person smell, I think is what me and my brother would call it.
Yeah, but and that's what many people refer to, but it is those physical changes within us. It's our pheromones, it's our hormones, it's the body getting ready to slow down and start to die. Now, you will see that in maybe somebody that's 20 with an illness, because the body will start to slow down. So it looks different, but it's the same kind of process, if you see what I mean. So as our body starts to become weaker and more tired, we may lose muscle mass. Let's say we may lose weight. We also may start to lose our appetite. We maybe start to eat and drink a lot less and sleep more, like I said. Our memory may start to be a little bit, and maybe get forgetful or a bit vague. What we often then see is people go through a period of real emotional stuff. People can start to reminisce. People can start to have funny dreams. They can start to feel really emotional about things that maybe they wouldn't normally be emotional about. So they generally start to cry more. This is the water stage. It's linked to the water in our, in our body. We start to see people maybe becoming incontinent at this point. The bodily fluids start to go a bit haywire. People can, interestingly, we hear at this point, people might start to talk about their mother. Now, the mother figure is a really key thing, whether you have a good relationship with your mum or not, whether you see or know your mum or not, whether she is here or not. The explanation I have for that is the fact that obviously we come from our mothers. We are intrinsically linked, energetically, spiritually, DNA. We are, science links us directly to our mothers. It sounds like it's maybe more of the spiritual woo-woo stuff when I talk about that. But actually, if we have a dying person in hospice or hospital, more so hospice, even the doctors, if somebody starts calling for their mum or says they had a dream about their mum, or maybe is half asleep and talking to their mum, even the clinical healthcare professionals will go, hold on, something's shifting. So it's like one of those phenomena that is widely recognised that actually somebody might be starting to approach the end of their life. So that's really interesting. I'll never forget, I looked after one, he was 99, he was Mandarin. He didn't speak very good English, and all he did in the last few days of his life was call for his mum. It was heartbreaking, but equally comforting to know that actually, yes, this was happening now. He was finding comfort and he just wanted to be with his mum or call out for his mum, whether he was seeing his mum maybe. And again, I think it's a senses thing. No matter what you think or feel, something happens around death. There is something else. Some people will think maybe it's the mum thing. Maybe some people will report it could be like lights flickering, or the temperature changes, or you feel different, or somebody looks different, like something happens. So even people that I know that are completely black and white, death is death, there's nothing, will go, oh yeah, there was this one time. We've all got a story. Now, bearing in mind, these stages don't always happen that clearly. It's not an obvious, they're here. But it's these subtle changes that we see in somebody. At this point as well, chances are people aren't really eating and drinking much at all. This is a huge thing for people. We spend our whole lives nurturing, feeding, watering, gathering, family time, Christmas dinners, Sunday roast. That's very much part of our lives, is to have food together. So when our person goes, I'm not hungry, and you think they've not eaten all day, they must have something. We really struggle with that. But our physical body knows how to die, and not eating is part of that. So some people may still have an appetite, and some people die on their feet, as they say, and these stages may not be very obvious. But for the most part, most people that come to the end of their lives will naturally stop eating and drinking because the body says, I don't need it. It can't process it. Our muscles become weak, so chewing even becomes an issue. Now, we take for granted all of these teeny tiny muscles all in our mouth, our throat, our tongue, our neck, everything that it takes to work, all of that becomes weaker. So when I talk about muscle, I'm not just talking about being able to get up, walk around and, get in and out of bed. I'm talking about our whole physical body gets really tired. So if people are saying, I'm really not hungry, haven't had an appetite for days, I know I have porridge every morning, but actually I really don't fancy it. That's the body's natural way of going, it's all right, I'm good. Don't need it. And one of the a sentence I say probably, if not, maybe even probably every day, is I'll say to people aren't dying because they're not eating. They are not eating because they are dying.
Do families find that distressing then when they come to you? They're not eating their favourite jam roly-poly or something like that.
Jam roly-poly,
same here, custard.
Because it's what we do. And also when people are dying, we feel very helpless. If the stuff I'm talking about as well is we're talking about when there's no more treatment. People aren't on chemo, they're not having tablets anymore. We've had to accept that actually, whatever age, whatever reason, everything is done. And we have to just now support this physical body through the last stage of life, the dying bit, the bit that nobody wants to really talk about, the bit that we spend all this time trying to fix and rescue everything. Then there's nothing more to do. We don't seem to want to address that bit, but then they're dead. But what about here? This is where we come in. This is where hospice at home teams come in. This is where extra love and support, we support this dying bit. So with all of these people, we're assuming there's nothing else that's been done. Their body's becoming weaker. They're becoming more tired. They naturally start to eat less. But because we then don't have anything to do, we're not taking them to appointments. We're not sorting out prescriptions. We can't call the GP because there is nothing for the GP to do. What do? We stick the kettle on. We make them some soup. We do something. When you can't even do that, that's a huge thing for families to get their head around. Not only are they then feeling helpless, there's this extra layer of, I've starved them. I don't want them to dehydrate. I need to feed and water them because I'm doing it. Rather than, and that little phrase that is very well known in this world, it hopefully helps people shift their mindset. they're not starving to death. It's the body's natural way. The skin does become weaker, becomes more paper-like and dehydrated. It may change colour, all natural, because the body starts to bring everything away from the extremities. So we often might see people's hands and feet or fingers and toes go slightly blue or purple, and mottly skin, all normal. And because of that, the skin then gets dehydrated, but no IV fluids, no amount of build-up drinks, no amount of water or whatever is going to hydrate the skin, because those processes aren't working anymore.
Okay, so that's just wasted fuel and energy to try and put into someone.
It's the energy emotionally that we need to try and get through to people, because people run around panicking, thinking he needs IV fluids, he's not able to swallow. He's not able to swallow because the muscles have got so weak, which means that his body is really poorly, is starting to die. The fluid won't hydrate him. The nutrients that you're desperate to get into them won't give them the energy that you want it to. Because we know if you've been poorly, maybe you've had a sickness bug, you've got rid of everything out of your system, you're weak. You need something to eat and drink. It takes you a few days to build that energy up. This seems to be the mentality we have with people who are poorly. When our dying person is weaker, they're sleeping more, they're not talking as much, they're not eating, we think, hold on, you need to get some sustenance in you. Come on, Dad, have something to eat. That's not going to build them up in the way that you hope. It's not going to give them the energy that it would do you or I if we've had a rough few days, we've been ill, and we think, actually, I need some decent food in me. I need some fruit, I need some veg. Our bodies are instinctive. They know what they need. And we listen to them every other time. But when it comes to dying, we don't listen. And the bodies are giving us all the signals we need to know. So it's knowing that actually the body knows how to be born, how to birth, a liver can regenerate, for crying out loud. Do you know what I mean? Our skin sheds every day. It knows what it's doing. And going on to your friend's dad that recently died, what happens after that kind of water emotional phase is that quite often people, like I said, they're not eating and drinking. They may be bedbound at this point. They're probably not communicating as much, if at all. What can happen is people go through a phase of terminal agitation. That's a very clinical term, but it's what we also refer to as the fire stage, which is where people are agitated. They're not themselves. They might get stroppy. They're up, they're down, they're hot, they're cold. The duvet's off, the duvet's on. Get me this, no, go away. Or go away, come back, don't leave me, you're annoying me, go. It's just a real period of unrest. Again, you could put a spiritual or religious, reason for it. It could just be part of the physical processes of the body. Who knows? But it's a very real period that people go through. It's normally maybe only for hours or days. It's not normally a long drawn out thing. But what also happens through this period of dying is that people's brain does start to shut down. People can become more confused. They can start to see things and experience things that we can't. You might call it hallucinations. Maybe it's visions. Who knows? But people might often see bugs on the wall, or dead relatives, or they may be reliving old experiences that they've been in. They may start to talk a different language. They may start to talk about something that they've never told you before. I had a lady that was in her 90s when she died, and she had an awful experience when she was younger. She had dementia. She had an awful experience when she was younger in the war, where she saw her friend's face get blown off in an ammunition factory. She never told anybody. She always told this story, which stopped. When she was dying, going through this period of not even really agitation for her, she was a bit unsettled, but it was this kind of the brain working itself out. She regaled this whole story that nobody ever heard. She'd held that for so long. So some people can start to share stuff that they wouldn't normally share, or they wouldn't want to share. Maybe it's a bit, I don't know, I wouldn't go as far as say deathbed confession, but it's very much a release. It's, I need to leave this behind. I need to let this go. I need to share this. It needs to be heard. I need to be heard. Not all the time, but often at that it happens if it's going to happen at this point. And people can change. They can get grotty, be a little bit stroppy, snappy, swear at you, get angry at you, when actually you're going, look, I'm only trying to help. And maybe that person wouldn't have normally had a go at you. They would have been very placid and gone, oh, I know, thank you. But actually they go, no, leave me alone. It's also because the senses are all, like I mentioned earlier, the senses start to change. The sense of touch, your skin can become sensitive. Sounds can seem really loud. Smells that you love, you can't stand anymore. Your eyesight changes. And again, maybe you're seeing things physically, but maybe you're seeing things on another level. And everything about that, you take like everything, all your senses just change. So when we go through life, and you're a hugger, for example, at this stage of life, if somebody tries to give you a hug or hold your hand, it might be too much. So actually when you go, oh, get off, it can be heartbreaking for the people that are looking after you, because it's like, but mum, this is what I do. I come and I sit and I rub cream into your hands, and this is what we do every night now. No, get off me, leave me alone. It's heartbreaking. But if we can understand that some of this is very much just a natural, normal process that they are going through and it's not personal, as hard as that is, it hopefully can offer some comfort for us to understand that this is dying. This is dying. And then when that happens for however long, that's when after that, people might rally. They might even come back to be more lucid, to be talking more, to go, I fancy a cup of tea. We often see that and people will be like, oh my God, they're suddenly better. As soon as somebody says that to us as death care professionals, if you like, we go, oh heck, make the most of them being able to talk to you now, because we don't know how long this will last, because when this happens, we often see a decline not long afterwards. So it's great that they're back in the room. It's great they want a cup of tea. I love that they've come back and they can have a proper conversation because they weren't really lucid yesterday. I love that they feel that they want to open the window and sit with you and get some fresh air. Remember this. Like, take this. This is the quality time that you won't get back. And it's making people realise, don't now focus on getting better, making plans, because they're not present. They then start to go to places that actually, no, come back, stay with them now in this moment. Make the most of this. And that rally, if it happens, could be minutes, hours, maybe even it might get a few more days. But as soon as somebody's gone through most of the processes of dying, the skin's changed, they're weaker, all of those other things we've talked about, when all of that's happening and they go, oh, I feel all right today, we almost need to get in there quick and go, again, make the most of this. Stay in the moment. That's all I say to people. Be present.
Okay.
Stay with them now.
The things you've just outlined there are obviously off the back of questions that you're regularly asked by family members, like, oh, their skin's changed or their breathing might have changed.
Well, I haven't mentioned the breathing.
Oh, sorry.
No. So after that phase, if they have rallied, or even if they haven't, what we'll then see is that after they've gone through that period of maybe agitation or maybe they're unsettled, it may be that they're just unsettled for a couple of hours. It's not always this big thing, but for some they can be quite demonstrative with their agitation. So it's different for everybody. What then normally happens after that is that's when the body goes, okay, that's when we'll see the last phase of dying, which is the breathing. So it's the air phase. People are generally not talking. They're not with you. Maybe they're not looking at you. Their eyes might be open or closed. They're not really moving. And it's literally just the last now mechanical process of the body, which is the breathing and the lungs. Now, what people can experience here is what is often called the death rattle or chain stoking.
Yeah, I've heard of chain stoking. What is that?
People experience periods of apnea. So, sleep apnea is a thing. So it's where you breathe, you're breathing in your sleep and then you stop and then you're not breathing and then you're breathing again. That can happen at the end of somebody's life. So they'll take breaths, then there'll be a long pause, then they'll take a breath and there might be another long pause. And that can be really difficult because you feel like you're constantly waiting for the last breath. But that's essentially then you are waiting for the last breath. So what will happen is those periods of apnea will increase in time. Again, not everybody experiences it, but it's very common. But what also people experience in that time is the chestiness. So the fluids that we have in our body, now that we're not moving, our body's shutting down, the organs are shutting down, the brain's shutting, everything's coming to a standstill. The fluid is just sitting. So that last bit of breathing can sound quite bubbly or wet, a bit like got a chest infection. And I say to everybody, it's always harder for us to hear than it is for that person to experience. When somebody's at that stage, chances are they're not frowning. There's a very calm look on their face. They're not necessarily moving, at all. But actually, if the breathing was a problem, their body would respond. They would frown. They would try and cough. They would maybe be a little bit because the body is going, oh, hold on, I'm not comfortable. Then it will naturally do it. For the most part, that doesn't happen. So we know that it's a case of us struggling with it more so than the person that's dying. Sometimes it can sound really loud. Sometimes it can sound really groany in between those breaths, and it can be really distressing, but all still normal. And when it happens, it doesn't necessarily mean we have to jump in, fix, rescue, panic. It's just that they are breathing loudly at the end of their life. Maybe it's just moving their head slightly. You can do all those small changes to help the body feel comfortable and to help calm those noises, but they are all normal. And
your job in those situations in a professional capacity is to inform the families that this is normal. Don't worry, they're not in any distress.
Yeah, I think throughout this whole process of dying, my job, I can't fix anything. I can advise, I can provide information, I can educate, I can support, I can reassure, but ultimately I'm just there. I don't have an agenda with anybody that I work with. I'm always guided by the person that's dying and their family or the people around them. So I will do and be however they need me to be. Some people need me to be honest, open. This is what's happening. This is what we're going to do. Others just need me to literally be there. So I might suggest moving a pillow, but they're the ones doing it. I might suggest that actually maybe we do call the district nurses. Maybe that there could be some medication because actually they don't seem quite settled. but I'm actually not doing it. I'm just there.
I think we probably covered there the act of dying and that horrible, often couple of weeks or months stage.
Why is it horrible?
Because I'm scared. I suppose because I've not been fully educated on death properly, and we don't talk about it enough. I will have a question for you towards the end about it, but I think, you know what, I'll ask you it now. Are you scared of dying?
No.
And I'll ask you why later.
Okay.
Don't go anywhere, guys.
But your perception in your head, you are conditioned to think that dying is horrible.
I always think, at the moment I've got, and I don't know if you had this when you've got a son, haven't you?
Yes, yeah.
When he was young.
Yeah.
I'm just, I hope I don't die.
Yeah.
Because he's only 8 months old, and I really want to see what he gets up to. And I know I'm not going to be able to see him until when he's 60 or 70 or 80. I know that, but I'd love to see him when he was 50.
Yeah.
And I don't want to. That's what I find scary about death, is just the FOMO of it, just missing out.
Yeah. But interesting, then it's not dying that you're scared of, it's the FOMO.
Yeah, exactly.
See, as society, we have this conditioned idea that death is horrible. And funnily enough, I actually did a post on my social media about this exact thing this morning. I said, is it dying that you're scared of, or is it death? They're two different things. Being dead is one thing. Some people have a spiritual faith. Some people believe they'll be with God, whichever God that may be, in heaven. Some people think I'm dead. There's nothing to it. My body's dead. That's it. Whatever works, like whatever gets you through the day, fine. But interestingly, when you drill down with people what it is they're actually scared of, it might not be the dying process. It's not being around for their family. Or it's they have already this idea of how dying's going to be because they experienced something that was really difficult. 90% of deaths are peaceful and calm. A handful of deaths. In my 11 years I've been doing this, and I've spoken to and I'm friends with a lot of other death care professionals. Dr. Catherine Mannix, who's an incredible author, she said it herself as well. Death is a calm, peaceful, safe experience. There is support, there is understanding, there is medicine. There's lots of things to support the dying process. It's us that are scared. And do you know what we're scared of as well? Grief. We're scared of the grief already before it's even happened.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you about. So we covered dying. Because I think preparing to die and the section of grief are so linked. In fact, the death bit in the middle kind of feels actually removed from those two. How do you help people to prepare for that? And what are the biggest mistakes that families and people who are dying make when it comes to preparing and then grieving afterwards?
The biggest mistake is not preparing. The biggest mistake is not talking. I see firsthand the impact of not talking. When none of that happens, when people don't talk and they don't explore it, on top of grief, on top of anticipatory grief, so the things that people are already feeling before their person's died, you've got this unknown black hole of shit that you know nothing about. And why would you? Because it's not something you deal with every day.
What do you mean?
The paperwork, who to call, the medicines, where it comes from, who's dropping it off, what the hospice does, what the district nurse does. Well, the oncologist has sent this letter. Do I need to go to that appointment? Is that one cancelled? Is that medicine necessary? Is that every day? That's just a handful of the questions that you're going through. And when you then get a GP say, I'm going to refer you to the hospice, people go, oh, hospice, he's dead already. With no real understanding of what hospice care does. So people, like I said, this bit between there's nothing else we can do, there's no more treatment and being dead, this is the bit that nobody talks about and nobody knows where to start with. But interestingly, we panic and go, oh, heck, I know nothing, but we still bury our heads. We still go, I can't talk to mum, it'll upset her. But interestingly, mum's going, I can't talk to my daughter, it'll upset her. Both want to talk. So we often avoid conversations because we assume we're going to upset somebody else, but it's more often because we're going to be upset ourselves.
Doing my research about what you do for a living, and particularly some of the other podcasts you've appeared on, it appears that the biggest mistake people make when they're dying is to not tell anyone all these really logistical basic things that make it easier for the family to deal with their death once they've gone.
See, so that's the other thing I'll say to people. If people don't want to talk, write it down. So I'll say to people, do you know what, Mr. Smith, if you don't want to talk to me, I totally understand that. I'm not here to make you feel uncomfortable or to upset you. I am here if you want to talk. But equally, might I suggest, write some things down. And one thing I say to everybody is 3 things on a Post-it. If everybody went home, if everybody that watched this wrote 3 things on a Post-it that they want for their death or their funeral, trust me, they have no idea how much of a benefit that would be to those left behind. God forbid they get hit by a bus tomorrow, or they are, if somebody is poorly.
Well, just thinking about my own family, I don't think I'd know what my parents would want at the moment at their funeral, whether they'd want to be cremated or buried or not. I don't think I know that.
My advice to you today, Jane, go and find that out. Absolutely. Because again, God forbid something happens, so only will you be grieving them. Where do you start when the funeral director goes, so what are we doing? You're already feeling like the weight of the world is on your shoulders and you can't, it's difficult to get up in the morning with grief. It's difficult to go there and get the motivation to stick the kettle on and brush your teeth. You've just gone through such a huge loss of somebody that you love. You haven't got the capacity to answer those questions. So if somebody's answered them for you and you go, do you know what, I haven't got a clue, but there's my dad's Post-it note. Cremation, no flowers.
Supertramp.
There we go.
Dreadful. I had a young friend of mine who died suddenly when he was 32 years old. He just dropped down dead in his living room without any, warnings whatsoever, anything like that.
Wow.
And the definite feeling and repercussion from not having those conversations with him, because he's 32. You
think, why would I at 32?
Exactly. And so he's not had those discussions and he's not told them, knowing him, he probably didn't write down what bank accounts he had and all those subscriptions and things like that come in.
Sorry, just on that note about the subscriptions, one really good bit of advice I say to people is if they go, God, where do I start? Go through your phone. Everything now we have has got an app on a phone. I've got my HelloFresh, Spotify, your banking app, your silly games that you play that, you think no one knows, but you're playing them. But actually, maybe you have got a subscription where you pay for your coins or whatever on the game. All of those things that are connected to you, you have a digital footprint. Most of it you have an app for. So if people go, oh, where the heck do I start with that? Go through your phone. People go, why should I? I'm 30 or, I don't need to do that. What harm does it do? And again, when I see the impacts, and you said about what, mistakes people make, when I see the impacts of at any age, people that have died suddenly, or they suddenly get poorly, they have maybe a really quick illness and they're not around, they can't get their affairs in order quick enough. It doesn't take much for us to do it now. Yes, it might be emotionally challenging. It may be difficult. You may struggle. But please trust me when I say it's worth the hassle now than later on down the line when, if it's you that's trying to get your affairs in order and you're poorly, you're in pain, you're struggling, you're in spiritual or emotional pain, which means that you may not have physical pain as such, but emotionally you're really struggling, obviously, because maybe you're young and you have a family and you're dying and you don't want to die. That's an impossible time to make a decision. End of life plans should not be made end of life. They should be made much more in advance, and they should be made while we're well, when we're in a space of clarity, logic, understanding, where we can understand the consequences, we can go over things, we can talk to people, we can research. So, you don't have to go in depth even, but to do it while you can, honestly, the benefits are huge. And you may not feel it now, and you may think, actually, again, it's too difficult, I can't face that yet. Honestly, to face it later when you're poorly or after your person has gone is a million times harder.
So kind of plan your death so you can get on with enjoying life.
Exactly that. And actually, I know that if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, I know that my son, he's only 13, my son, my mum and dad, everything's there. I've even got the funeral director. It's handy, obviously, working in the world that I do, because I've already told the funeral director and everything that what they need to do. But it's all there. And actually, God forbid something happens to me, I do have, like I said, my spiritual faith. That I take comfort from knowing that I probably won't be far away from my son. I know that I can look down and go, he's all right. Yes, he'll grieve and he's going to struggle and this is horrible, but he hasn't got what did mum want? What money is coming out of there? We owe money to this because, we didn't go to that app because that's still running and now the bank account's shut and that's declined. And, all of that sort of stuff that is just added crap that you don't need. Wills is another thing. I've got, again, another good friend of mine called Emma Gray. She runs rainbow hunting. She lost her husband and he was in the Marines and she was a solicitor. So between the two of them, very savvy, very organised, got all their affairs in order. There was still a whole mountain of stuff that they hadn't even considered because, again, why would they? And he died at 38, with 2 young daughters. So living life thinking, well, you don't need to do any of this. And then he got poorly and then obviously they had to do it. She now runs a company where she helps people sort out what she calls their sadmin. So it's sorting out what I would call life laundry. Sadmin. But it's all the stuff that is there, but we have to face it. And to do it now, like I said, from that place of clarity and understanding, you reap so many more benefits because you can do it. And then, like you said, get on living. I know that I can live a rich, full life and not have to worry about that stuff at the back of my mind. Like when you've got a bill that you didn't pay or, your credit card's looming or that feeling of, I'll do it later because whatever it is you procrastinate and you want to put it off because it's too heavy. It only snowballs and gets worse. We know that.
Just take a day or two or a couple of
Moments,
hours.
a minute every now and
like
again.
you said, three things on a post-it would be
Something.
better than nothing. I left home today saying to my wife, I'm interviewing a death doula today. I'll get back and I'll be like, Emily, can we talk about my death?
She's going, oh my God, what did that woman do?
Yeah. Yeah, but maybe
it's-
she'll be like, well, because we haven't wrote wills and we've got a
you've
young
got a
son.
little person. You
Yeah,
have
exactly.
to.
So we're going to have to get on with that. A couple of days ago, I bumped into my mate out in the street whose dad had just died. And he said to me, I can't believe, he said, I'm really struggling to process that I'm never going to be able to speak to him again. And I said to him, you probably will, anyway. Not that you will, but you can, can imagine it. And I have this kind of belief that there is actually a kind of immortality in people. And that is the values and ideas and beliefs that you taught the people around you. And if they go on to take them on further in their lives, that means that lends some sort of immortality to you once you're gone.
Yeah.
Do you believe in life after death?
Absolutely.
Number one, why? And also, have you got any examples that you've come across through your job when you've been near how many people dying?
Hundreds, if not thousands.
Okay. Have you
So
got any evidence from that, or something that you would perceive as evidence?
I can honestly say with every fibre of my being that I do believe in life after death. And I could sit here and tell you all the stories about things that I've physically seen, like I said, about lights flickering. I've seen the classic things. There was a lady whose husband had died about 35 years before she did, and she'd never met anybody else. She spent her whole life just kind of loving him. And we talked a lot about spiritual stuff, and she said, he's never come to me, he's never tried to contact me, and I hear these stories and it's never happened to me. The day or the morning that she died, she said to me, he sat in the corner. He's been there all night. And I can't even tell you, I felt that she was absolutely telling the truth. And it was one of those moments, just before she died, she said, it's all right, he's gone. And it was like, okay. And the cushion moved on the chair. People are going to go, she's full of shit. Believe what you like. I know what's true. This is, so I could tell you a million stories like that.
Yeah. And I think, it's always going to be kind of part of the conversation, because it really is. It's kind of the transition from being alive to being dead from the perspective of the people who are still alive is really important.
Yep.
And they can either find comfort from thinking or believing in whatever they want to believe afterwards. And like you said, no one can have a go at you for your feelings.
No.
To your
exactly that
10-year-old self. Thinking about that as well, just are there any mistakes that families make when it comes to death, when it comes to the younger part of the family? So not a young person dying themselves, but
kids involved in some way.
Kids involved in someone's dying.
Yeah. I think one of the most harmful things we can do for kids is exclude them. One of the most harmful things we can do is not be honest with them. Now, I've worked with some child psychologists and social services, to actually make sure that I'm well equipped if I'm supporting people with young kids involved, to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. And the one thing that every common child healthcare person will say is honesty. They need to know that death is part of life. They need to know that it's okay to cry. They need to know that it's okay to be challenged by this emotion. Kids don't know their emotions. That they act out when they're excited because it's just too overwhelming, or they get stroppy when they're hungry. Don't we all? But their emotions overwhelm them and they act out because they can't contain it. So we can't. What's the word? We don't want to dampen that down. We need to let them express themselves, but we also need to let them know that grief will happen. Difficult things will happen. We mentioned in the very beginning about pets and grandparents. That's normally kids' experiences. And if they don't have pets, of course, then they're not going to have that maybe first experience. But maybe it is when a plant dies. Maybe it is a death on telly. Maybe you buy them books, and there are some incredible books that are available for kids. There's a great author I know called Claire Shaw, who actually wrote a book with John Adams, who I mentioned, who also lost her brother and then was shielded from it all because the family with good intention think, I want to protect them. And so she's written books now on how to talk to children of different ages, from young to kind of, 7, 8, 9 to teenagers, about how we can talk about death and grief. If you don't tell kids the truth, they create their own narrative. They create their own version. So it's either maybe something awful and scary, like in a horror film. And that's why I asked you when you said about, it's horrible. But if we're talking about kids' experiences, you need to be guided by them. So if you say to a child, this has happened. You know, maybe it's a pet, maybe it's a fish, and maybe you want to have a little ceremony in the garden, or maybe it's a grandparent or a parent. You know, you need to give them the option. What do you want to do? Do you want to go to the funeral? Do you want to do this? What's a funeral? Okay, this is going to happen. There's going to be a coffin. You know, it doesn't have to be every detail. It's kid level honesty.
So when someone dies and a child says, well, what's happened?
Again, you know, it's simple honesty.
Don't try and protect them from it by saying,
the worst thing you can say
they've
is
slipped away, or I don't know what it may be.
The worst thing you can say is that they slept. They're sleeping.
Okay.
They either don't want to go to sleep themselves, or they think that everybody sleeps is going to die and they're never coming back. It's really important to use the words death, dying. You know, their body died, their body got really poorly and it couldn't work anymore. So the heart stopped beating, the brain couldn't think anymore, and the lungs couldn't breathe anymore. There's a really good way, because that makes sense to kids. This is what your brain does. So, you know, the body got really poorly and it had to stop. So yes, maybe you can link it to they're in heaven, they're in a pink fluffy cloud. Whatever faith or whatever thoughts you have, you can impart that. If that's what, you know, again, there's no judgment. People need to do what they need to do. But it's important that that little person understands that person's body has died and they're not going to be around anymore. But it's also important then that you let them know that it's okay to cry, scream, shout. Equally, it's okay if they change the subject. Kids are very fickle. So
they're mad, aren't they?
They're nuts.
They'll be like, okay.
Yeah, so
just get on with playing or something.
So they might have an outburst. They might get upset. They might even laugh and find it funny. You know, you've got to let them express themselves, and then they'll go, right, so what's for dinner? You're going to go, no, hold on, we need to go back here. We haven't finished. Go, oh, it's sausage and chips. What you'll find is that they'll go, so you know Granddad died? And it will come up.
They'll come back later.
When they're ready. And the difficulty here, and this is often the way with everything to do with death and dying, we're often guided by our feelings. Of course we are, but it's because we feel uncomfortable. We don't know how to handle it. But it's also okay to say to kids, you know, if they go, so Granddad's in heaven, what does that mean? It's okay to go, do you know what? I don't know. You don't have to have the answers.
Something up.
Yeah. So why did Granddad die? So why was Granddad in a box? You know, the kids will come out with this stuff. It's just about, okay, it's got to be honesty. You have to give them the option of being included. If they choose not to, that's okay, but you can't ever stop that conversation. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I want to wrap my son up in cotton wool. I want to make sure that no girl ever breaks his heart. I want to keep him trapped up indoors, and, you know, nothing ever bad is ever going to happen to him. But he's never going to grow as a person. He's never going to grow emotionally. He's never going to grow mentally. You can't shield kids from life. And with children, we often talk about resilience. You know, we say that kids are resilient. Kids are naturally, and they are to an extent, they are much better at bouncing back from things than we are, because they just take every moment for what it is. So if their moment is really upset, but then they think they're hungry, they're then talking about dinner. Or if they realise that the picture wasn't finished drawing that they did earlier, you know, they'll go with that. But what we also need to do is teach kids resilience. We need to give them the opportunities in life to experience the difficult stuff, to know that being resilient is something that we learn to do. We don't always get it right. It's never easy, but actually, so when they go through every breakup, every job interview that they don't get, every argument with their mates, every difficult thing, you know, when they don't have the money to buy what they want to buy, or, you know, all of those things, saving up, the challenges that come with normal adult life that we don't teach in school, and I think we should. But grief and death is part of that learning. You can't shield them from that, because they can't, you know, for kids to grow up and experience, say, 2 or 3 losses in their life and get to 25 and don't even know what a funeral is. How are they going to cope then when they don't get that job? How are they going to cope when life doesn't go their way?
Yeah, it's a bit of a 1970s saying, and I hesitate to say it, but you'll realise why. I've heard that a parent will never smack a child as hard as real life will.
There we go.
So
it's true.
That's probably from back in the day when kids were getting smacked all the time, but it is
I think
true.
that's frowned upon now. But
yeah, it probably is. Definitely is.
No, it's true.
How does being a death doula and the job that you do, the fact that you live around, let's face it, you live around death. How does that, are there any advantages you take into your normal life from that?
Oh God, I am blessed every day. And that sounds a bit cheesy, but you know, when people go, oh, life's too short, life's precious, you don't know what's around the corner. I am smacked with that every day in the face. But that is a huge blessing. And don't get me wrong, I say, like, you know, I don't sweat the small stuff. Of course I do. I'm human. I worry about the bills and my son, and, you know, and I do get bogged down with daily life. But I'm always very quickly reminded, one, to live in the present, not worry about what might happen next month or next year. So I've just, business-wise, I've just signed up to something huge in April. And part of me is absolutely bricking it. But the other part of me is like, that's April. Like don't get sidetracked with life in between, and don't miss those small moments. And so many people, especially people that are maybe my age or younger or that have young children, that always hits differently because there's a whole other level of like relativity to it. It's like, you could be my friend. We could have been down the pub. We could have gone to school together. And when that happens, that's when I go, I can't worry about April. I just need to make the most of seeing my son, seeing the people I love. And when my son comes downstairs and he's like, he plays, I've got one of those VR things, the Oculus thing. He's got extra handles on it and his room isn't small enough. So he has to destroy the lounge and he comes down and plays things. He's all arms and legs everywhere because there's more room. It infuriates me. It irritates me. But even stuff like that, I'm like, do you know what? I get joy and laugh at him because he's all gangly arms and legs and hasn't got a clue what he's doing, but he's loving it. And it's things like that. I think I could say, no, you're annoying me. I'm working on the laptop. Go upstairs. But actually, maybe I'll just let him play for an hour. You know, it's the things that, and again, I said this on many podcasts, but it's the things in life that just pass us by that we think are really insignificant. They're annoying. Don't want to do it. I'm too busy. Those are the things we wish we had back. So a huge advantage to my job is the fact that I'm constantly brought back into the present moment. It does remind me that when big stuff's happening, again, just be present. Don't lose sight of what matters. And just whatever is going on with somebody else or the life stuff or the paperwork or the thing, is like, actually, I'm healthy. My son's healthy. The people I love are healthy. Right now, that might change, but right now, I'm all right.
We're trying to ask everyone who comes on the same question. What would you tell a young Katie? What piece of advice would you give a young Katie?
It's funny you say that. I would tell young Katie to worry less what other people think. Now, I talk with a friend of mine in the kind of spiritual way. We both have a very similar spiritual faith. And I talk about, we call her Teeny K. So she's teenage Katie, who's a bit stroppy, throws her toys out of a pram, has got a bit of an ego. I've always had a character, I've always had confidence, and I've always had a voice. But I think growing up, I've had so many people say to me that I was too much, or I should have, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. And I think as a young woman, we're especially in the kind of the 80s, 90s, Pamela Anderson, if you didn't look like that, then you weren't good enough. All of that kind of stuff that our society has ingrained in us. There are so many things that I went through and things that I experienced that I probably now would do differently. As a 42-year-old that knows who she is, that knows what she wants, I'm good. I'm okay with me now, but I wasn't then. So I think I would tell young Katie, just crack on and do it anyway. Don't worry about it. Because all of that stuff that I worried about, I know is irrelevant now. And I've had to fight. And even in the role that I do, some people don't think what I do is a real job. Some people think that it's a load of nonsense. And that's okay. You're not going to use me, and that's absolutely fine. But actually what I do adds value to so many people's lives, and I can't lose sight of that. So I focus everything I do on the greater good. And I think there are opportunities that I miss because I maybe didn't feel good enough, because I was told otherwise, and I was like, too much, or you can't be like that, and you can't say this, and you can't, say it in that way. That's too much. And it's like, actually, I'm just me. Everyone just needs to be themselves. So that's what I tell little Katie.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much for coming in.
You.
You all happy, guys? So that's a wrap.
I was in Moscow in April this year. We're in the middle of a war.
The war is escalating.
There are very few Brits or Americans going to Russia. Between them, they have 75 to 80,000 nuclear warheads.
Let's suppose that Russia launched a large nuclear strike against the UK.